Sona finished her sky-blue dress just as the sun slipped behind the roofs of Lembira. The fabric was soft and a little uneven, stitched with pieces saved from her mother's old wraps. She held it up and laughed at herself, pretending not to hear her friends' worries about the gala of Arawa. They said it was a place for families who carried wealth like a second skin, not for a girl who learned to sew by lantern light. Still, she walked toward the grand hall that night with her heart thumping hard, telling herself that courage sometimes feels like fear wearing its best clothes. Inside, the chandeliers glowed like trapped stars. Women floated past in gowns that whispered at every step. Men looked polished and sure. Sona smiled, but each glance at her simple dress felt like a small pinch. When a woman from Morala laughed and called her dress cute, Sona tried to laugh too. Another man joked that she must be lost. Their voices felt louder than the music. She slipped toward the balcony, ready to leave before anyone noticed her trembling. Then she heard her name spoken the way people say home. Rinnel, her old mentor, was suddenly there, studying her dress with warm eyes. Before she could speak, the host on stage began describing the new cultural innovation fellow, someone from Lembira who taught art to hundreds of children. The crowd fell silent when her name was called. Rinnel nudged her forward, and the same people who mocked her stepped aside as if a new light had entered the room. The applause washed over her, soft and shocking all at once. Later, when she walked out into the cool night, she held the edges of her handmade dress and breathed in the air of Arawa. For the first time, she felt stitched together in all the right places. Sona stepped into the Arawa Cultural Gala feeling as if the ground had shifted under her feet. The hall was so bright it almost hurt her eyes. Huge chandeliers hung above her like frozen fireworks, and gold lights spilled over the marble floor. People moved gracefully across it, dressed in clothes that looked like they belonged in a storybook. She tried to walk with the same calm, but her heartbeat kept racing ahead of her. Her sky-blue dress felt smaller with every step. It was the dress she had sewn with her own hands, the one she had touched and retouched until the stitches felt like part of her breath. Yet in this place filled with silk and diamonds, the dress suddenly felt too soft, too honest. A pair of women walked past her, their perfume sharp as citrus. They turned to look at her, then leaned close to each other with quick whispers. Sona smiled as if she could not hear, but she felt each glance like a tiny poke on her skin. She kept telling herself she belonged here, that she had a right to see the faces and art she admired from afar. Still, a thin fear curled inside her chest as she stepped further in, trying to blend into the waves of color and movement. A server carrying a silver tray offered her a drink, and she thanked him with a shy smile, mostly to steady her own nerves. She sipped slowly, letting the cool taste calm her breathing. She moved toward a sculpture made of twisted bronze, hoping to look busy, but a group from Tarumo drifted her way. One of them pointed at her dress and chuckled, not even trying to hide it. Another man tilted his head as if trying to understand why she was there at all. Their laughter was not loud, but it cut in sharp lines. Sona felt her face warm. For a moment she wished she could fold herself into the shadows. She tried to answer with a small laugh, pretending she was not the target, pretending it was all harmless. But her throat tightened, and her smile felt thin. She stepped back before they could say more, pretending she had somewhere to be. In truth, she wanted to disappear behind one of the tall pillars, or maybe behind the thick curtain near the stage. She kept walking without looking up, her fingers brushing the fabric of her dress, as if checking that it was still holding together. She found a quieter corner near a huge window that overlooked the streets of Arawa. The city lights below looked gentle compared to the harsh brightness of the hall. Sona pressed her hand against the window frame and breathed slowly. She thought about leaving. She imagined slipping out into the street, walking until the music faded behind her. It seemed easier than standing here with her chin up while strangers judged the weight of her worth. But something inside her refused to let her feet move toward the exit. It was not pride, exactly. It was the memory of her mother's soft humming while cutting fabric. It was the promise she made to herself that she would stop shrinking for others. So she stayed. She lifted her head again. The hall was still too big for her, too bright and too polished. But she told herself that even the smallest light can survive inside a room full of glare if it keeps burning steady. She straightened her shoulders, took another quiet breath, and stepped back into the crowd. Sona had been trying to move through the hall without drawing attention, hoping the soft sky color of her dress would help her blend into the glow of the chandeliers. But the group from Morala spotted her before she could slip away. They circled her with the kind of curiosity people usually give to something they don't quite understand. One of the women, tall and dressed in a gown that looked sharp enough to cut glass, let out a bright laugh as soon as her eyes landed on Sona's dress. She called it sweet, the same way someone might talk about a stray kitten curled on a doorstep. Sona felt the laugh ripple through her, not as a compliment but as a reminder of how small she must look in a room full of polished elegance. Before she could think of a reply, a man stepped in with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He joked that she must have taken a wrong turn, that maybe she was looking for a school play down the street. The group chuckled, the sound rising and falling like a wave breaking against rocks. Sona tried to join in with a thin laugh, but her voice shook a little, and she hoped no one heard it. Her face warmed so quickly it felt like she was standing under a heat lamp. She could feel her throat tightening, the air crowding in her chest as if it, too, wanted to escape this moment. She kept telling herself she came here for a reason. She had earned the invitation. Her small art workshops back in Lembira had reached real children with real dreams. She wanted to see what the wider world looked like, to witness the kind of art people whispered about with excitement. But as the group kept staring, whispering to each other with tilted heads and amused smiles, she felt something inside her pull back. She wondered if she really belonged here, if she had been foolish to imagine she could simply walk in and be treated as an equal. Her hands drifted toward her dress again, touching the seams she had sewn with stubborn pride. She remembered how long it took to get the hem even, how she had stayed up through half the night fixing a line of crooked stitches because she wanted it to be her best. Now, under their eyes, the dress felt almost too soft, too gentle for a place that seemed to reward sharpness. She forced herself to breathe, trying not to let her shoulders collapse. The woman who first laughed told her she had a brave spirit for showing up like this. The words were wrapped in a smile, but the tone was a soft cut. Sona nodded politely, even though she could feel her chest sinking. Her own smile held for a moment, then wavered. She stepped back as if giving them more room, though what she really wanted was space to breathe. For a second she imagined turning around and walking straight out of the hall. She pictured herself slipping through the tall double doors, the night air hitting her face, her steps growing faster with every corner she turned until the city lights blurred. She imagined telling her friends later that she simply wasn't ready, that the gala was too grand, too loud, too far from who she was. But another part of her, small but firm, whispered that she had survived harder moments than a few cutting laughs. She remembered carrying boxes of donated paints across Lembira's dusty streets, teaching young girls how to draw their own stories, watching their eyes light up as if someone had switched on a lantern inside them. Those memories steadied her. She looked up again, even though her heart was still thumping uncomfortably. She let the Morala group drift away without following their gaze. The laughter still echoed in her mind, but she told herself that a single cruel moment did not get to decide the worth of everything she had built. She stood there for a quiet breath, gathering herself, and then she walked deeper into the hall, hoping that somewhere inside all this glitter there was still a place for a girl who came carrying nothing but a handmade dress and a stubborn, trembling hope. Sona felt the comments collecting around her like tiny stones dropped into her pockets, each one making her feel a little heavier. She tried to keep walking through the hall, tried to pretend the music was louder than the words, but some voices have a sharp way of slipping through anything. A woman brushed past her and tugged her sleeve with a playful smile, pretending to fix imaginary loose stitching. Sona forced a small laugh, even though her stomach tightened. A moment later, a man leaned close and asked who paid for her ticket, his tone light but his meaning clear. She swallowed hard and said nothing, letting her eyes drift toward the balcony doors. She needed air, or at least a place where no one would look at her dress as if it were a mistake. She stepped out into the quiet corner near the balcony, not fully outside, but far enough that the cool air touched her face. The music from the hall pulsed through the floor beneath her feet, and for a moment she wished she could float above it all. She could still hear some of the laughter inside, even though it wasn't directed at her anymore. It didn't matter. The words had already settled under her skin. She leaned against the rail, holding the fabric of her dress between her fingers to remind herself it was real, that it was something she made with care. But right now, it felt like a target. She tried to lift her chin, telling herself she knew who she was. She came from Buvira Street in Lembira, where neighbors shouted greetings across dusty yards, and where she taught children how to turn scraps of paper into little worlds. She knew the value of her hands, the strength of her patience. Yet standing in this bright, polished place, she felt as if every bit of confidence she carried had been rubbed thin. She watched the distant lights of Arawa blink softly in the dark, and for a moment she imagined slipping down the long staircase, leaving the hall before anyone noticed her absence. She pictured herself walking through the quiet streets, shoes clicking against the pavement, breathing easier with every step she took away from the glittering room. The idea almost made her smile. It felt like safety. But as she stood there leaning on the cold railing, she realized how tired she was of shrinking. She came all this way, hoping to learn, to be inspired, to see what her handmade work might become. She didn't want the night to end with her running from other people's cruelty. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeper, letting the night air fill the places inside her that the comments had bruised. She told herself she would stay at least until the announcement. That much she owed to the girl she used to be, the one who once believed that her small dreams had room to grow. Still, her legs felt unsteady, and her confidence felt as fragile as a glass cup held too loosely. She took one more slow breath, straightened her shoulders in the quiet, and stepped back toward the doorway. The music was still loud, the room still bright, and nothing had changed. But she walked in anyway, hoping that somewhere inside her, one small light was still refusing to go out. Sona was just about to slip through the side door, ready to trade the bright hall for the quiet streets of Arawa, when she heard her name spoken in the warmest way, the kind of voice that pulls you back before your feet can escape. She turned slowly, half expecting another sharp comment, but instead she found Riddle standing there, taller than she remembered, dressed in the gentle confidence of someone who had grown into his purpose. For a moment she forgot the sting of the evening. Memories of dusty afternoons in Lembira rushed back. The old community center with its peeling turquoise paint. The way Riddle used to guide her small hands as she shaped a sculpture from scraps of clay. He had been the first adult to look at her work not as a child's hobby but as something alive. Now here he was, rising through Arawa's cultural projects, greeting her as if she belonged right beside him. He studied her dress with a long, thoughtful smile and asked quietly if she had made it. Sona felt her breath catch, because there was no judgment in his voice, only curiosity, only the kind of respect she had been craving all night. She nodded, trying not to show how fragile she felt. His smile widened into that old familiar one from years ago, the one he gave her the day she won her first art prize, and everyone in Lembira clapped like she had touched the sky. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if this moment was meant only for them. He told her the dress was beautiful, that she had always had a way of making simple things feel full of life. The words warmed her like sunlight after rain. She let out a soft laugh, embarrassed but grateful, and he laughed with her the way he used to when she spilled paint or panicked over crooked lines. He said he had been hoping to see her tonight, that he'd heard whispers of her workshops back home, and how the girls she taught now spoke about her with bright eyes. Hearing that almost made her knees weaken. All evening she had tried to prove to herself that she deserved to be here, and now someone who knew the real her had shown up without warning, handing her back the confidence she'd nearly lost. The noise of the gala faded a little. The bright lights seemed softer. She felt her chest loosen, as if some tight rope inside her had finally been cut. Riddle asked her to walk with him, not to show her off, but simply because he wanted to talk and catch up. They moved through the hall together, and for the first time that night Sona didn't feel like a small shadow in a giant room. When people looked at her, they saw her standing beside someone they respected, but more importantly she felt herself standing taller, as if his presence reminded her of the girl she used to be, full of color and fearless ideas. He told her he still had the clay bird she sculpted at 10 years old, the one with the crooked wings she tried to fix 3 times. She laughed and covered her face, and he said it was crooked in the best way, like it was learning how to fly. His words sank deep into her, gentler than any praise she'd heard in years. And in that moment, with Riddle beside her and the gala glowing around them, Sona felt something she hadn't felt all night. She felt seen. She felt safe. And she felt, very quietly, like she was allowed to stay. The lights inside the hall dimmed just enough to pull every wandering thought back toward the stage. Sona felt the shift in the room like a soft ripple through water. Conversations faded, laughter settled, and hundreds of eyes turned forward as the host stepped under the glow of the central spotlight. His voice carried easily across the hall, warm and confident, the kind that made people lean in. He spoke about the honor that would shape the future of Arawa's cultural work, an award usually taken home by famous designers from Macondo or dancers, whose names filled billboards across the region. People around Sona whispered guesses, their voices quick and excited. She heard one woman mention the Njoro family. A man behind her predicted a fashion house from Morala. Riddle stood beside her with his hands clasped, calm but watching closely. Sona tried to focus, but the earlier sting of the night still tugged at her, and she wasn't sure she had the energy to care who won. Then the host said the award was going to someone from Lembira. Sona's breath caught without warning. Lembira was small, almost never spoken in halls like this. She felt the air shift again as people murmured, surprised. The host continued, describing a young creator who used art to lift the confidence of girls who believed no one was listening to them. He spoke of a small workshop built from donated tables and leftover paint, a place that had somehow reached more than 300 children in just 2 years. Sona felt her heart rise into her throat. Every detail felt like a gentle hand on her shoulder, turning her to face the truth she wasn't prepared for. She froze where she stood. Her fingers pressed lightly into the fabric of her dress, steadying herself. The hall around her blurred at the edges. She wasn't sure if she was breathing. She heard Riddle exhale beside her, a soft sound that almost felt like he had been waiting for this moment more than she had. The host went on, speaking of handmade teaching tools, of afternoons spent guiding shy girls through their first drawings, of a woman who believed that a single spark of creativity could open a door no one else could shut. Sona felt the world narrow to that one voice on stage, as if the entire hall had stepped aside and left her standing alone under an invisible light. When the host finally spoke her full name, the room seemed to still, every whisper stopping at once. Sona didn't move. She couldn't. It felt as if someone had reached inside her chest and turned something bright back on. People were turning to look at her now, not with the earlier amusement or thin smiles, but with surprise, curiosity, something softer that she didn't want to name yet. Her knees wobbled. For a second she thought she might fall. But Riddle touched her elbow gently, the same way he did years ago when she stepped onto a small stage to receive that childhood art prize. His voice reached her quietly, telling her to breathe, to step forward, to let this moment belong to her. And as the applause began to rise, she realized the hall wasn't as big as it had felt before. It wasn't swallowing her. It was opening. It was making room. For a second Sona wondered if she had imagined her name, but the silence in the hall told her she hadn't. It was the kind of silence that feels thick, the kind that stops even the softest breaths. She felt her legs weaken as though someone had gently pulled the ground away. All around her, people turned. Their eyes searched the crowd until they found her small frame near the middle, the girl in the sky-blue dress they had laughed at earlier. Sona's heart pounded so loudly she could almost hear it in her ears. Riddle touched her elbow with the same calm strength he carried back in Lembira and gave her a small nudge toward the aisle. She didn't move at first. She wasn't sure she could. Her dress suddenly felt too light, too fragile, as if one more comment could tear the seams. But Riddle stepped beside her and began walking, and she followed because it felt safer to trust his steps than her own. The space between her and the stage felt impossibly long. As she walked, she caught glimpses of the people who had mocked her earlier. The woman who tugged her sleeve now stared with an open mouth, her expression shifting as if she wished she could pull her laughter back into her chest. The group from Morala watched her as if she had changed into a different person, but she hadn't changed at all. The only difference was that the truth about her had been spoken out loud. Sona's palms were sweating. The soft fabric of her dress clung to her skin. Yet as she took another step, something inside her steadied. She raised her chin, not in pride, but in a quiet acceptance that this moment belonged to her no matter how terrified she felt. When she reached the stage, the host smiled warmly, the kind of smile that didn't need to be big to feel sincere. He spoke about her work as if he truly understood it. He described the handmade brushes she crafted from old broom fibers, the way she mixed paints from crushed chalk and leftover clay, the way she turned an empty storeroom into a place where young girls from Lembira felt seen for the first time. He said her project was being funded on a national level, that her workshops would expand across Gashara province. Sona felt her breath catch. She had dreamed of growing her work, but only in quiet ways, almost afraid to imagine too much. Hearing it announced in front of hundreds of people felt like standing at the edge of something beautiful and new. Then the applause began. It was soft at first, like gentle rain, then grew into a wave that rolled across the hall and hit her chest so suddenly she had to blink back the sting in her eyes. She felt the sound move through her, warm and overwhelming. For a moment she closed her eyes, not to hide tears but to hold the feeling still. When she opened them again, she saw Riddle smiling from the crowd, proud in the way only someone who knew her from her earliest days could be. And she saw something else reflected in the faces around her. Not pity, not surprise, something quieter, something real, recognition, as if the room finally understood the worth she had carried all along. Sona stayed for a while after the ceremony, letting people come to her one by one. Their eyes were different now, softer, unsure, almost careful. A few of them tried to smile the way they should have hours ago. Someone from the Morala group offered a compliment that came out tangled, as if they didn't know how to speak to her anymore. She didn't gloat, not even inside. She simply nodded with a calm that surprised her. It felt like her heart had finally stopped shrinking and settled into its full size. Riddle squeezed her shoulder before slipping away to greet someone on the other side of the hall, and she was left standing in a circle of warm light that no longer felt threatening. The music played on, but it didn't press on her like before. It felt distant now, like something she had already outgrown. When she finally stepped outside, the night air in Arawa wrapped around her like cool water. She let out a laugh she didn't even know was sitting in her chest, a laugh filled with shock and relief, and something close to joy. She looked down at her handmade dress, at the tiny seams she had worried over, and held the fabric gently between her fingers. It felt stronger now, as if the night itself had rewoven it. She stood there on the steps, watching the city lights blink across the streets, and realized how long she had carried the fear of being unseen. For years she had worked quietly, hoping someone might notice the good she tried to plant in small places. Tonight the world didn't just notice. It opened. And as she began walking away from the gala, her steps light and steady, she felt as if she was stepping into a life that was finally big enough to hold her.